Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Safety Brief by Intelex, a podcast where we'll talk about the hottest safety topics and offer perspectives, all things EHS. Hopefully, you'll leave this podcast with something to think about and maybe even something to apply. My name is Trevor Bronson. I'm the Director of Portfolio Strategy here at Intelex. I'm joined by my trusty co-host and sidekick, Scott Gaddis, VP of our EHS practice and esteemed best-selling author. Scott, they brought us back for a second episode. Can you believe it?
I didn't know we would have an episode 2. I thought it was like a one-time thing.
They must not have listened to the first one. They must have greenlit this one before they did anything there, huh? Well, here we are anyway. Today's topic is an interesting one: Gen Z in the workforce, something on a lot of people's minds, and how to manage this quasi-unique group of people.
Did I sign up for this one? I can't imagine that.
I think you were voluntold, so you're gonna be stuck with this for the next 25 minutes here. All right. Gen Z in the workforce. Who is Gen Z?
You know, I speak. Maybe we got this assignment because I do speak about this quite a lot at conferences, and I would say that if there's an abstract that goes out, this is the one that's accepted, and the room is filled. So I think a lot of folks, just like me, my age, are kind of looking at this new bunch of people coming into the workforce, and they are going, "Oh my goodness, what have we done?" When you define it right, Gen Z is like that people group from, 13 to 28. So we have at least a set of them in the workplace now. So wow, that's pretty amazing when you think about it.
Yeah, doing the research for this, the oldest Gen Z people being 28, I guess, surprise. I think of them as 20s kind of entering the workforce, which a bunch are. That's the middle, right? But that is an interesting takeaway. And right, so Gen Z is known for, I guess, a bunch of things. Maybe when you think about how they work, wanting some deeper motivations beyond the classic ones of just go clock in, clock out, get paid, leave. They want to be coached a certain type of way. They expect a certain type of thing from their employer in terms of how they're treated. What do you think? What have you seen, or what do you talk about in your presentations about that?
Yeah, well, when I kind of look at this group, right, Gen Z, they just grew up in this climate of technology, right? A tremendous amount of technology advancement. They're always on social media, right? I tell folks when I talk about this is that they are the first generation that was born with a smart device in their hands. So they've never known a day where they didn't have technology, and they're so aware. That's the thing that scares me a bit about this generation, but I'm also kind of looking at that going, boy, I'm really glad, because they are up to date on things like global issues, climate change. If there's a conflict in the world, they know about it 30 minutes after that happens, maybe even a few seconds. Mm-hmm. But Trevor, when I think about it, you're much closer to Gen Z than I am. I mean, what are you seeing? Is there any difference between you're a millennial, right? And this bunch?
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I mean, I think about when you mentioned they've grown up online. I remember when I got my first cell phone, I was 13 or 14, and it had a pull-out antenna still, and I think if you handed a phone like that to someone in the Gen Z crowd, especially someone on the younger side of it, they may not actually know the function or importance or how to use that. So not growing up with that kind of leaning into technology as I got a little older and entered the professional world is certainly something different from what they've experienced. And yeah, I mean, I think they, like we said in the beginning, from my perspective, they just have a slightly different expectation and style of working. The motivations that they seek for going out and doing a good job need to kind of come internally, in a sense, and not just be dictated to them and do this because of this and don't really question it, right? They're going to look for some more important reasoning to go out there and accomplish a task or be part of something bigger. And whatever they do, it needs to be meaningful, or ideally should be meaningful to them. And of course, this is not a blanket statement per se. Everyone's different, but in broad strokes. So compared to someone who is a millennial like myself, I think in the era when I entered the workforce, and we're talking kind of like the financial crisis and making sure you go out and have a good job and kind of climbing that ladder, that's just not always the most important thing important thing to this group. It's going out and contributing sometimes, or doing what they kind of want to do or feel comfortable doing or are motivated by. So you gotta, as a boss, as a leader, whether we're talking EHS or otherwise, make sure this group has kind of a mission that they're working to achieve, that they believe in achieving. And it seems like that's maybe the way you get the most out of this group of people. Now, we zoom out and say that's probably how you get the most out of anyone. People generally work harder for things they truly believe in, but maybe there's more of an appetite for a certain group of people to just work hard no matter what, even without that. Then you have folks in the Gen Z generation that only work hard with that, like need that to get the most out of them. So I think that's kind of a key difference that I see between people from my generation and people a little bit younger than myself.
Do you think, are you irritated by this new people group? I mean, I remember when millennials came into the workplace, right? And I was in leadership. I was younger, right? But in leadership, and I literally, started every day thinking, well, millennials are just going to ruin everything that I put together, right? And I have
We
to
didn't.
think.
We didn't. Right?
No, no, and you didn't. I think that was the plausible answer that I came up with. Well, that didn't happen, right? But millennials kind of pushed me in a certain way that I was somewhat uncomfortable at the time,
Yeah.
But over time I kind of adapted and adopted some of those really great ideas, right? So I think every generation kind of looks at the one that follows and says, well, that's it, that's the end of society. And I will say that I do work with Gen Zs. I mean, we both know that Intelex is
We're a
full
tech
of
company.
Yeah, we are that company, and there's these different assumptions, right? And one of the things that the first thing I noticed is that when I went to work, gosh, back in 1989, I just never envisioned even leaving where I worked. I just thought that I would stay there for my entire career,
That's a great point.
and I never thought too much about it. I thought about myself being loyal to the company that I was working for, right? And so some of these things that I thought were, quote, being a good employee or being a good worker, that didn't even seem to resonate right with Gen Zs, because I see them coming into companies like ours and maybe staying for a bit and then going to another adventure. It's not because they're dissatisfied. I think it's just because they look right for adventure, and so I see that as one of the differences right off the bat. When I think about this bunch.
That's a great point. Yeah, a little bit less attached in a way, kind of living for themselves, right? Doing what motivates them and makes them happy, and that's a noble endeavor. That's a really great thing. It's cool that they feel empowered to go do that and live that kind of lifestyle, especially professionally. But yeah, I mean, to your original question there, like if I found challenges, it's not, I wouldn't say that. Um, every person is unique, no matter what generation they come from. So you classically have some people that just seem to go out there and really want to grind and go do something. And those kinds of people can be easy to manage and work with and work alongside. Other people may just be there for the job, and that's that. So if you want to get them to the next level, you have to find something kind of else to push them there. Or sometimes that's really all they want to do, and that's okay too. You just have to find the way to kind of work within the bounds of that with the broader team, right? And of course, if this is ultimately resulting in a poor work ethic or a poor output, that's a whole nother thing, and you need to manage your team appropriately. And I think we're all professionals here. Like that's the reality of business in general, and that so be it. But you just want to make sure that you are more intentional about what makes each individual really tick. And it just takes I feel like it takes a bit of a deeper assessment, analysis, maybe deeper relationships with the Gen Z people and that doesn't mean you need to like have a deep personal relationship. That's not what I mean by that. It just means you need to make sure that you have an understanding of what does a good manager for this person look like, because a good manager for this other person might be different than that. And you can't just assume that everyone's going to respond to the same thing.
No, I think what you just said, right, created this. I'm always mapping all of these things in my head. How this person ticks, right, is really an important idea, right, and how we talk about it, because Gen Z, safety at work for me, if I look back in my career, was making sure everything was physically guarded, right? Making sure that we had physical protections that protected you from reaching into something, right? Well, protection for Gen Z, it just goes far, far, further than that or above that, because they look at themselves in this holistic, whole person well-being, type
Mhm.
of view, and I think when I think about this group, right, focusing on well-being is not a bad thing. I
No.
think things like mental health and emotional health and physical health, I think those are really, really important things, and it may not have been things that I focused on for the workforce that I was in charge of protecting, but I'm certainly glad that Gen Z is pushing that, because mental health, it does matter, right? Emotional health, it matters, because everything kind of adds up, and for me, when I think about those kind of two or three things, it still can result in loss in the workplace. So I love that idea that this people group, right, is moving beyond just physical protection. And the other thing that you said, Trevor, that I think is real important is that, this idea of purpose driven work. They want to see some type of alignment between personal values and how the company practices their work. And that's why I think many times we see this group leaving or going, to different roads, is they're looking, right, for that organization
Yeah.
that meets their personal values. And
Yeah.
again, I really kind of look at that and say that's a good thing, right? They just want
Mhm.
a strong focus on ethics and social responsibility and things like sustainability. Those were not even on the radar, right, when I started my work. So I kind of like those ideas, right, that are becoming very apparent, and they're kind of bubbling up to the surface.
Yeah.
So
No, I mean, totally. Going back to your earlier point there, like if you think about, if you say Gen Z as a whole is more, in touch with themselves, let's say, it's just another function of risk, right? Our jobs as EHS professionals are to make sure people don't get hurt.
yep.
Priority number one, kind of the sentence ends there. People getting hurt, as you mentioned, is a function of a machine guard in a properly locked out, stamping machine and things about all these kind of physical controls that you can put in place, or administrative controls or engineering controls. But accidents happen so often when people are complacent or rushing, or there's that human factor of, humans are the biggest variable in all of this. And
Yep.
making sure that someone is present at work and feeling good and ready to do the job well and safe is an enormous risk factor. It's almost in a sense like silly. It wasn't focused on before, as we just trying to engineer things out sometimes, but to see this not just as, oh, now we have to do wellness and yeah, see the kind of holistic nature of safety. That's just if we kind of strip it to the bare bones, that's just a better way to do safety. You're just trying to
Yep.
figure out a way to account for more risk that comes from, between the ears. So it's just better safety when I think about it like that.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that at all. I think that when I look at how I led program, even before this new generation entered, right, even before millennials entered the workplace, I was looking at some of the signs of what success really was about, right, when I was leading program. And I identified a couple of things, is that I really needed to remove myself from being a commander, right, being in control, to
Hmm.
being the chief collaborator, right? To being a
Yeah.
chief mentor, because I really did link it together with the more I can get participation and getting people to actually partner with me, the better chance that I had, for success. So when I think about this group, that's exactly what they're asking. And really they're demanding that it's done in the workplace. So the idea that inclusion is a really, really important idea, because it gives, right, us the diverse backgrounds to consider how a safety program should work. And I think that when we think about inclusivity, right, and
Hmm.
the identities and the backgrounds of just different people, and we have different, people now, more different people in the workplace than we've ever had. So
Totally.
including them, bringing them to the table, I think it probably reflects, well, I know that it reflects a better safety program. I think the other thing that I always kind of worry about is this whole idea of bias. is that Gen Z is this group again that demands that organizations proactively eliminate bias. So we should be designing a program that includes, and I'll give you kind of a story about this, is that when I started, you had 2 or 3 different pair of safety glasses that you could wear. You had one size of a protective garment to wear. Gloves came in just very few sizes. And I tell you that story because I had males and I had females in the work environment, and you can bet what most manufacturers were designing their equipment to fit. It was a bunch of men, right? So when I had, female employees that approached me and says, "Who bought these gloves or who bought these glasses?" Well, they were saying these don't fit me, right?
Yeah.
And that really did start to give me an idea that there are some biases, right, and
Totally.
safety, and until we kind of bring everyone together and fit the environment for the person that we have, we're going to lose, or we're going to jeopardize how good safety could be. But I think it's further than that, right? That was just a simple story. But, are our safety protocols, for example, in the languages that for the audience that they have to reach? And even again, when I think about it, is like, gosh, I used to write my safety policies, my procedures in English. And I just wish that you had a good idea of what I was talking about. I didn't go to the next degree of saying, well, I need to make sure these are in Spanish or French. I just expected, that person on the other end to figure it out. So I wasn't being very fair, right? I wasn't really teaching accessibility at the time, but I
Hmm.
quickly pivoted, right, to make sure we did not have those type of biases in the workplace. So I think this Gen Z group, right, they're kind of pushing that, is that, they've learned about people and about all these cultures around them from a very early age. So they've identified in things like diversity and the importance of being me, right, in a unique way, brings about, I think, a lot of positive momentum, in the workplace. So I'm all about it. I think it's just absolutely the way that if we want to truly get the culture that we want, these are really valid points that I think this people group is bringing to the workplace.
You and I do a lot of webinars and
Yeah.
podcasts and speaking engagements. They that's probably why they chose us for this. That and our their devilish good looks, but probably
Probably
mostly the experience.
my hair.
Exactly. And one thing we're always talking about on those whatever the medium in which we're giving a message or a talk is culture. Like that always comes up. Culture. How do you get
Hmm.
better culture? How does technology allow you to get better culture? How do certain management styles get you a better safety culture? And when I think about someone that doesn't adopt safety culture, I think about this grizzled old construction worker or something, and you go out and say, "Yeah, where's your hard hat? Where are your safety glasses? Where are your gloves?" And they say, take these gloves and shove them right up your ass. Like I'm not going to wear them. I've never worn them. Stop telling me to wear them. And that's hard. That's hard to get that
Yeah.
person to buy into safety culture because of a variety of reasons. But then we talk about Gen Z being a bit more aware, maybe more motivated by an employer, a company like doing good out there and taking care of them and caring of them as a person. Does that actually make for an easier job for the safety professional to get that buy into safety culture when people kind of understand the motivation and appreciate the motivation behind really wanting them to go home safe at the end of the day versus someone that tells you they've been doing this job the same way for 50 years and you're not going to come in here and tell them that they need to do it this way because it's better for their back.
Yeah, I think this is really where coaching and mentoring really come into play, because when I look at what Gen Z is demanding, things we've already talked about, like mental well-being is really important. Being supportive is very important. Stress management, really important, right?
Yeah.
Stigma in the workplace, very, very important. The difference is that, when I look at my group, right, and I'm a I guess a late baby boomer, right? So I'm just right there straddling the line between Gen X and baby boomers. But all those things affected me. I just didn't talk about them, right? I
Yeah,
was not
that's a great
bold
point.
enough to kind of bring them up, and so I'm having a mental health issue, right? You just didn't talk about those things. I think the big difference is that the things that Gen Z is bold enough to demand, right, are things that other generations wish they had said. So if I'm leading a facility now, I would use that to my benefit, right? And
Hmm.
say, well, now I have a license to have a better discussion with these other generations that have gone through these things but would not say them, right? And I think that connection is going to be quite easy. I think you're always going to have that grizzled construction worker that won't talk to you, right? But giving this license right through communication is really a powerful tool, and I think it is led from Gen Z. I think when I look at it, and Trevor, we talk technology quite a lot, but my whole essence in at Intelex is to try, how do we use technology in a way that connects people, that engages people, and many times I call it bidirectional, right, data engagements, where you're giving me a piece of data and then I'm communicating through data back to you, or maybe it's a bulletin to share information. But that whole approach that I think about is that how do we turn technology into not just a data collection platform, but an engagement platform where you learn right from the information that you're collecting, where we can give you feedback, where we can ask you for an opinion. We think about that, technically at Intelex, but when I think
Hmm.
about this people group, it's some of the very same things. It's like, man, I just want to be in a place where I'm heard, right? And just because I'm young does not mean that I don't have a very effective, right, opinion on making us better. And that really
Totally.
requires collaboration. So I kind of think about some of those ways. And what about you? I mean, think about this as employers, and let's just imagine that we're leading a construction site or a manufacturing site. Where do you think we need to go, right, to meet the expectations of a Gen Zer?
Yeah, I mean, a couple expectations. You mentioned that, tech, we'd be remiss to say that we work for a tech company. We spend basically all of our time thinking about how to make better EHS software. So as leaders, you want these folks to use the technology that you've purchased and, paid good money for, and you want to see adoption. So on that note, the tech needs to be good. Like the willingness to tolerate any kind of bad, clunky technology that loads forever, that has poor UI, that doesn't really do the job. It only is going one direction, right? It's getting less and less. And that's Gen Z, we talked in the beginning, kind of grew up with technology. So there's an
Yeah,
expectation of how that works, and you need to meet that expectation, or else they're going to be the first ones to call it what it is. It is junk, right? So you don't want that. So when you're out there shopping around for technology or have a technology specifically in AHS that you want to adopt, it has to be user friendly enough to keep the most demanding users in a sense. And again, Gen Z, that's truer for them, but it's true for my generation. It's true for your generation, Scott. At this point, we
sure.
all, as people that exist in the world, that are operating ChatGPT all the time and using all these consumer apps, we know what good and bad is. So you get away with bad, even if it's big important workflow enterprise software. You still get away with bad less and less. So that's kind of one of the expectations you have to account for. And the other big thing is how you interact, how you coach, how you mentor, how you support, how you provide feedback. Those communication channels, I think, need to be open and consistent and intentional, to get the most out of this group in a safety context. Specifically, make sure they're engaging, participating, promoting the safety program, the EHS program that you want them to be a part of and succeed in. Yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of what it comes down to. There's plenty of nuance and detail below that, but in the safety brief, I think that's where we can go.
Yeah. No, I don't disagree. I think you're right. I think that when I think about our technology, right, I think now is a pivotal moment. And if you're a practitioner, right, that's listening to us, I think you still kind of got to put your plan together, right, to make sure you're assessing the risk in your work environment. So that's just foundational to
Mhm.
safety practice. But right, you really have to look at it differently. Is that things have become faster, they've become busier. Technology outside of what we do at Intelex is going to continue to just expose you to new risk. So assessing risk in your workplace has always been, a denominator in how you practice. But Gen Z is going to really kind of force that, is that they really understand risk. And now they
Yeah,
just have to understand it in the workplace. I think the other thing is that, the thing that I've learned about this group is that they love to learn, but they only
yeah,
want to learn things that matter to them, right? And
exactly.
you almost have to package it up a bit like TikTok, or an infographic or something that gets to the point very, very quickly. And I've
digestible.
even noticed if I was teaching, I love being in the classroom and I love spending hours telling you how to do lockout tagout, right? But the thing that I've learned is
Riveting.
that Gen Z wants it concise, right? Can you tell me that in 15 minutes, right? Can you tell me that 3 times in 15-minute sessions or whatever that be? So I think there's a lot of that. And then, as we talk, even proactive policies is that, there should be more, they should be more inclusive, right? But we want to have a say in what those policies look like. So there's a lot of things that we may be doing, but we may be doing central to a safety team that needs to be exposed, right? You just need
Yeah.
to kind of break that out and pull in those groups to be more, diverse and inclusive.
It's such a good point, the collaboration part of it, and we always, I think EHS managers for a long time have come to realize that designing policies kind of with the people the policies are for always ends up in a policy that's going to be more followed, going to be more adhered to, but also probably going to be better. Classically, like designing safety for work is done versus work conceptualized. We've seen graphics and talks around that, and this generation specifically is going to be so much more receptive to doing something in that way, so that they know the why. It's not just an order from above, an order from corporate. That sucks. No one likes that, but especially not Gen Z. So you don't want to have that. And the training point obviously resonates. It's short term. It's quick hitter. It's something that doesn't lose their attention but gets the point home. And to your point, this is where kind of managers and leaders earn their money. I need my people to know this. What's the best way to get them to know this? For this cohort, it may be the big long classic training. For this cohort, it's the micro learning video. For this cohort, it's go around and walk around and like learn by doing. And that's where you got to identify what drives people, how do people interact. So knowing that nuance with generally the Gen Z people like to learn, like to engage, like to receive information is going to be key to being a better EHS leader. I mean, we last year at Intelex were doing a totally unrelated project to all of this, but asking EHS leaders if they had more money in their budget, like what would they spend it on basically to improve their EHS performance. One thing, and the most overwhelming response was training, just general training. I wish my people were better trained, aka I wish they were better able to go out and be safe without me having to tell them all the time or guide them or reference whatever. I just want my people to inherently know what safe work looks like. So that's where classically this training is so important, and finding the right ways to people.
I was listening to, I think all of that you said, right, kind of reminds me that feedback is king, right? Feedback is king, so you can ensure these things, right, are stepped accordingly to what their purpose actually is. So I listened to you saying, that technology can be a tool, but it's also showing, it's also counseling, it's also mentoring, right? So establishing these feedback loops is really, really important, not only for this people group, right, but for every people group. But it's going to matter more, to Gen Zs. And then, one of the things that we are not great at as practitioners is adapting, right? Is adapting to change. And it's one of the things, I mean, I kind of thought, Trevor, I'd come in here and I'd spar with you for 30 minutes or so, but that's not happening, because I think we're seeing the same thing across the spectrum of people.
Our producers aren't going to be happy about that, Scott.
No, not at all. But, but it does say you really do. Everything we've talked about, you got to be agile, right? You've got to utilize feedback and employ the learnings from feedback, because it's not only, I mean, Gen Z's watching, and sometimes it's kind of like when I work with some of our customers and say, well, how could you have 1,500 open action items, right, in your CAPA plan? And it always kind of comes down to the thing, well, we're going to get around to it, or it's not a priority, right? And it's the same thing that happens, is that once, someone sees that we're not holding up our end of the bargain, they just stop, right? They just stop reporting. Gen Z is going to be, I think, much more prone to stop and give you feedback that it's not working, right? So we've got to adapt, to things that we see. We've got to use feedback in a more effective way. Another thing that we didn't talk about, but I'm seeing this, is trying to figure out what the safety climate is. And the only way I even know you do that is through assessments and surveys, seeing what perceptions are, seeing how healthy the safety climate is. And I tend to pull people into rooms and let's just talk about that, right? And having open and honest conversations. And there's a new term in safety now, we call it psychological safety, right? And it really is that whole idea of it's a safe environment to share me, right? And we're not going to blame share. We're not going to think about you differently. But it's that whole person idea that we've already talked about, where it says I can be me in this environment, and I don't have fear of retribution or something happening to me because I share, honestly. So I think even that, right, is really important. So I think that, Trevor, I know we've got to be running low on time. So maybe what are 2 or 3 things you think about? I know what my thoughts are, but how do we bridge this gap between an old guy like me that's leading program, somebody from your generation that's a millennial, all the way over here now to this Gen Z new bunch entering the workplace? What are your ending thoughts on that?
I think, I hate to boil it down to something so simple, but it's honest, well-intentioned communication. Like we might be from different generations, but we're all human. And all of us want to be heard in our own way and want to make sure that the people we're working with are supporting us and enabling us. And while we may all have preferences and nuance to how we want things delivered and how we want to learn or how we want to be motivated, all of that can be discovered by communicating, no matter what the person is or how old they are. So you have these people coming into the workforce. Communication will overcome any difficulty. All the things we covered today maybe can give you a jump start on, a head start on not having to talk and wait to set things up and feel like you're prepared for the incoming set of workers. Like we said, there's going to be workers that come in and do a great job, that do a poor job, that leave after a year, leave after a month, motivated by different things. So you should be able to have things set for them. But at the end of the day, the more open the whole thing is to communication, honest feedback, and genuine improvement, I think the better off we'll all be.
Yeah, I'll add 2 things to that, and then I'm going to let you close because I've talked way too much again.
They're going to change the name of the podcast, Safety Brief, to like Safety Lecture or Safety Hour or something. It's all right. We'll work on it.
I'm always willing to lecture. I am always willing to preach a bit and evangelize the cause. So a couple of things, right, that kind of pop in my mind as we kind of start to end this thing is that, understanding and embracing the differences is a good thing. There's just these distinct workplace perspectives that anyone should know about. There's all these multiple generations that are in your workforce now. I think just kind of embracing that idea of understanding differences is a good thing. Embracing them is a great thing, right? And that really kind of forces or it leverages better collaboration. And I think it actually reduces conflict. I never mind when somebody disagrees with me, as long as we can get to a very effective conclusion, to that debate. So I think that's one thing. And then the big thing that I would say is that, wow, we probably need to spend time with leaders because leaders need the necessary tools to manage and motivate all of this multi-generational workforce. And if they're anyone like me, I kind of stayed away from these younger workforces when they hit the market because I kind of knew or I hoped that they would just kind of merge into how I thought that work was actually happening. I'm glad that I recognized that and pivoted. So now I say, well, just learn, right? Just learn these multi-generational parts of the workforce. And then I think, you'll get the cohesion and the effectiveness that you want. And I absolutely know this. The more we collaborate, the more we partner with all these different people groups, the safer our workplaces are. And again, that's kind of how I determine my success. Can everybody go home safe, right? Did they go home safe? And so that's kind of how I kind of think about today and what we've talked about.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. All right, cool. Well, I think that does it for us on episode 2 here. I'm pretty tired. I'm feeling a little burnt out, which is my segue into our next podcast, episode 3, where we'll be talking about the burnout crisis and how to manage that as an EHS practitioner. Thank you, Scott. I always appreciate it. You have a good weekend, all right?
All right. Thanks, everyone.
See you, bud.